So this particular presentation has come from an idea that has come out of the recent treatment literature for addictive kind of behaviors, especially those that are related to compulsive gambling, eating, porn use, and other things like this. And this research has come out of the mindfulness perspective. And the interesting thing that they're finding is that if you want to stop a behavior that's destructive, like overeating or porn or something like this, substance abuse, and you focus unique or specifically just on stopping that behavior, it's actually likely that you're going to increase problems. But if instead you shift you at the same time that you try to stop a negative behavior, you turn their focus to positive goals that they have that are incompatible with the negative behavior. Like, for example, if I'm struggling with weight and I focus on, I'd like to be able to run a marathon in a year or something like that, and you help them focus intensely on those positive goals that are incompatible with the negative behavior, you're much more likely to be successful. So, and we've known this for years in the sexuality area, and that is if you speak exclusively about the problems, the difficulties, the negative aspects of sexuality, you create more problems than you solve. And so this is what I like to start with this particular quote, because it says, we're going to win this war not by fighting what we hate, but by saving what we love. So let's focus on what we love about sexuality, the positives, and let's make sure that our messaging is stronger in that area at the same time that we're trying to reduce or avoid the negative behaviors. So what do we love about sexuality? Well, of course, we can have pleasure without guilt and shame when we express it within a committed relationship. It can result in some of the most sublime and wonderful, pleasurable experiences humans can experience. But it has to be in that context where there's trust and there's safety and vulnerability. It's one of the best parts of life for increasing relationship bonding between couples. Healthy sexuality is one of the best insulators against marital distress and divorce. It explains about 40% of the satisfaction in marriage, but more importantly, it explains about 70% of the distress. That means when you study couples that are happy and you see how much of the sexuality area of the relationship contributes to that happiness, it's not quite half. When you study couples who are not happy and they're struggling a lot and you ask them why they're struggling, for most of them it's something about the sexuality area that is the reason they're distressed. And of course, deeper meaning. For years, anti-religionist people have tried to suggest that religion is the problem with sexuality, that you create guilt and shame and hang-ups. And if you let people just enjoy their sexuality in pleasurable ways, they'll be more healthy. Well, in contrast to that, I'll show you some really interesting data in a moment that suggests that that's not actually true. That when you hold a view of sexuality as something that is sacred and sanctified, your experience of sexuality is much better than if you hold it as simply a pleasurable activity, your attitudes about it. So this is some of that data that we've collected recently. Sexual inhibition in highly religious people is higher, but it's just barely higher. Look at those mean scores. And this is actually not a significant difference. So yes, sometimes highly religious people can instill more inhibition if they're not careful. But in general, they have pretty similar levels to inhibition as the rest of the world does. However, if they hold, highly religious people are much more likely to hold a sanctified view of sexuality. So again, see it as sacred and deeply meaningful, as something that connects them with their spouse and with God, and you can see that they have almost double the rate of seeing sexuality in that way. The other interesting stuff, though, is that if your sexual inhibition is high, your sexual satisfaction is substantially lower, and this is a significant difference. So we want to reduce sexual inhibition, and at the same time, increase sexual sanctification. This is not always easy to do. And then this is the most striking result we found in these data. And that is, if you hold a view of sexuality that it is a sanctified expression of love, then you're almost double the amount of sexual satisfaction you're experiencing in your relationship. So again, there's these interesting ways that these work together. There's 3 central styles of sexual passion that we found in marriage. The inhibited style, which we just talked about a little bit, and that's where people generally repress their sexual expression. This interferes with healthy marriage sexuality because, of course, you have to be vulnerable and relatively uninhibited in your sexuality to really enjoy that together. Harmonious is the goal, and that's where your sexuality is in harmony with the rest of your life. It's not taking up too much space. It's not taking up too little. It's consistent with the values that you have and that your partner has. That's the goal that we want to pursue. Obsessive is when sexuality takes over life, interferes with daily functioning. Now, when we started looking at these 3 styles, and they're very distinct, and there's significant numbers of couple in each of those, we found some really interesting stuff. Of course, we thought originally that those who had more of an obsessive passion style would be the more problem porn users. But in fact, we found that it's all about inhibition. And so this is the initial data. This is brand new data. It's very interesting. So if on your left-hand side there is regular porn use, and on the right-hand side is compulsive pornography use. So this is where it gets to be more of an addiction kind of experience. And you can see that high inhibition creates higher usage of regular porn and substantially higher usages of compulsive pornography. It's the largest predictor of compulsive pornography use that we found in the data, is having this inhibited style. It's worse than the obsessive style. And so if we drive sexuality, what is also interesting is we're finding people who have an inhibited style, they bounce over to the obsessive style. So it's almost like there's a repression, and then there's a binge. And then they go into an obsessive binge, and then they go back to the inhibited style. So this is the thing we want to try to avoid in our lives and how we teach sexuality to our children. So how do we help our children develop a harmonious sexual passion? That's the question. First, we increase the frequency of how often we talk to our children about sexuality. Then we want to increase the quality. So how you talk to them about it, not just how often. And then we want to work on the message. So what is the message that we're trying to convey? So let's look at frequency. This is the most depressing part of the presentation, so just hang with me because we're not doing very well here. And it hasn't been good for decades, so we're not any worse, but we should be better. So here's the problems with frequency. It's very infrequent. Parents are just not talking to their children about sexuality very much at all, religious or non-religious alike. The most discussions that, if anybody's doing a decent job of this, it's mothers with only their daughters, unfortunately. So sons are getting left in the lurch, and in some ways they need it more than the daughters. That's not really true. They both need it a lot. But if you were going to neglect somebody, it's kind of strange that it's the sons that are getting neglected in this topic. Now, before I leave this one, the thing that is most striking about these data is fathers are so bad at this that they don't come above statistical 0 in many instances. In other words, they speak about it so little that it's not even measurable. So fathers have a lot of work to do in this area, and they just seem to have a lot of extra inhibitions in terms of talking to their children about sex. Mother's going to take care of that. Don't talk to me about that. Go talk to your mother. It's just not going well for fathers. Parents tend to avoid specific topics, and often they're the topics that their children have the most anxiety and worry about. Things like same-sex attraction, masturbation, porn, things like that are the topics that parents often avoid. And if anything, they'll give them the talk, and that's not particularly useful for some of these other concerns that they're very upset about. Religious parents wait longer to initiate discussions about sexuality, and they report fewer discussions overall. And it's going to get worse. One more slide. And two more slides. So then here's the statement that I really liked that I think we need to ponder. Many parents truly expect their children will approach them for guidance when they have questions about sex, but children also expect parents to initiate these conversations. This waiting game undercuts the potential of sex communication to influence the sexual development of children and perpetuates the cycle of silence that is observed from one generation to another. So both are waiting for the other person. Neither one says anything. Nothing happens. We go back into this silence, and it crosses generations. Here's basically what amount of data children are exposed to about sexuality. You can see since the 60s, it's just basically skyrocketing. This is no mystery to any of you. If you just turn on the television or watch Netflix or whatever, you'll see sexualities all over the place. But the amount of information that's given by parents and church leaders has remained pretty much static at very low levels. Here's some very recent data we just collected. That's right off the, right out of the, with just this last year. So there's some things here that are very disturbing. Even menstruation, even with females, half of them are often not getting any discussion before they're having to go through this experience. This is traumatic for daughters to start experiencing menstruation and not have any preparation for this. This is just atrocious. It shouldn't be happening. And males need to know about it too. Menstruation is something that affects everyone, and they need to be taught about it. It's not being taught in half of more than half of situations. The one area, so the middle two circles is the one I want to focus on for a minute here. Low religious people have only talked to their children about pornography about 22% of the time. Highly religious families are doing better, but this is the problem. So they're 10% better just about, which we're happy about, except this is the only area in talking about sexuality that highly religious people are doing more of. So think about that for a minute. What is happening is the highly religious people are speaking much less to their children about sexuality, but they're speaking more about porn. So the message their children are largely getting about sexuality is negative. That's a problem. You have to balance it. It should be like this. So yes, we want highly religious and all parents to talk about the difficulties and problems with pornography, but we want them to talk more about the positive things about sexuality so the child has, again, a harmonious perspective around sexuality. And then if you go over to these last two graphs on the right-hand side, it's abysmal. They're not talking to them at all about masturbation, basically, and then how sex is an enjoyable or a positive experience. These are not getting into the conversation. So problems with the quality and message of parent-child communication. Parents are uncomfortable and embarrassed, and they will be, especially if they do it infrequently. Parents often use a negative tone when discussing sexuality. So the emotional valence that's attached to sexuality is one of negativity. Parents often use fear and consequence-based language and underscore the negative outcomes of sex. This is where it really gets bleak for a lot of religious parents. Religious parents report more unease and fewer discussions overall, and then the worst are the Catholic, Jewish, and Mormon parents. They report the lowest levels of ease and communication in terms of religion. So these three groups have the biggest struggles in terms of this topic, and a lot of work to be done. Parents report markedly more communication about sex than do their children. This is pretty similar about all areas of communication. If you ask kids, how much did your parents talk to you about this or that? Children will under-report it. If you ask parents, they will over-report it. So it's probably somewhere in the middle. So that last one's not particularly alarming, but it's a common finding. So what we have to do is if we want our children to be abstinent as an example, we want to do more than just talk about abstinence, because abstinence is a behavior. Abstinence is not a positive message about sexuality. It's a line that you're drawing in the sand, which needs to be drawn. But if that's the central message, again, that's not a positive message about sexuality. So we want to teach our children the reasons they should be abstinent from or avoid certain sexual behaviors. What is the meaning or purpose of our sexual passions and feelings? If we use these passions correctly, what will be the positive results? That's what we want them. We want them to have that goal to pursue a reason, not just draw a line in the sand. Don't do this. We can share with our children what positive results of our good sexual decision-making have been in our lives. What are the joys and the beauty that has come to our lives, the positive things. Chastity or virtue is not sexual repression. It's about sexual direction. It's channeling our sexual energy toward positive goals we want in life, such as a satisfying, enjoyable, and stable marriage and family. So again, always connect it to that goal. So what is our goal in terms of talking with our children? Many parents feel that the goal, at least in the short term, is to control sexual behavior by instilling in children the idea that the behavior is wrong or sinful. So this is the central challenge. Of course, we don't want our children engaged in these behaviors. There's so many things that can happen to mess up their lives when they are. But if what we're doing is teaching this through this shame-based approach, the long-term effects are that they're more inhibited. And when they're more inhibited, then they don't have a place to talk about it, and then they're more likely to engage in the very behaviors we're trying to avoid. That's the paradox. And so we have to find a way around this paradox. So in order to help our children become sexually whole and enjoy sexuality in its beauty and wonder within marriage, we need to help them understand their sexual feelings and guide them as they work towards controlling normal feelings and emotions. So we have to get the tone right. And if we do this tone, you will be amazed at how your children can open up. But it's not easy to get to. And I've said in my earlier session that I'm a better parent the further away from parenting I get. My children are long since left the home, and I'm now a really great parent. In my mind, and sometimes even in their minds, but not always. But I'll share one experience that I did something well, and it actually was almost accidental, and then it helped us do more of this. And so I was over a youth group in my local church, and we had gone to one of these water parks the day before. And of course, when you're at a water park, a lot of people don't have very much clothes on. And I watched the young men, and they were tracking the young women with their eyes, kind of watching like this in astonishment at what they were seeing. And so the next day, it was my job to teach them a lesson. And so I started out the lesson with this. I said, so I noticed you guys at the water park yesterday, I noticed that you were looking at the ladies. And every head went down like this. The guilt and shame, you could just see there's it's going to be another one of these hard chastity lessons. I'm going to leave this lesson feeling like a loser, That's what you could see. And then I said this, and this is the thing that I've held on to and learned and tried to repeat as often as possible. Isn't it wonderful that you're attracted to women? And then every head like dominoes. Huh? What? They were just so not expecting to have a positive message attached to that every head, they had to hear it again. I said, well, isn't it wonderful that you're attracted to women? And what are we going to do with this attraction so that we keep it in the right place? And talk to me about some of the ways this is a challenge for you. And then they just started opening up. Just that one sentence, validating that they were sexual beings, that they are attracted to women, gave them an opportunity. And they would say, oh yeah, one kid said, I went in the grocery store last week and I was doing really well, and here on the side of the aisle was this magazine and it had this picture in it, and then it got me thinking about it, and I had a hard time. And he just shared this, and then another kid spouted off about, this girl that always wears these clothes, and it was so hard for him. And then they started, and then I said, well, so what are some of the things you do to help yourself to keep this in range? They knew what the range was. They knew when they stared a certain way and started to obsess, they knew what it did to their spirit. And they could talk about it. They could provide some strategies. They could talk about what they did. They came up with the solutions. It was one of these experiences where it's just a rare event. And so it's just, if we can get in the conversation about sexuality, a validation that they're supposed to have these feelings, that they're natural, that they're difficult to control, they will often come up with the rest of the conversation for you. They will lead it along. But it's hard to get that tone right. I understand how difficult that is. So we need our children to see the whys of sexuality are essential to good decision-making, both before and after marriage. Chastity is not about when sex happens, it's about why sex happens. So this changes things from then, how far can I go, to what do I want sex to mean in my life? What role do I want it to play? How do I want it to contribute to the goodness in my life? So what is healthy sexuality? Well, it includes these three main areas, and it's helpful to think about teaching your children in all three areas. You can't do this all at once, of course. You have multiple conversations about it. They need to understand their bodies. They need to understand what the sexual system is made up of, what the body parts are, what the names are, how they change through puberty, what happens when they're aroused. They need to understand all of that. And they need to understand the emotional dimension, how sexuality is about bonding and getting connected, about drawing you towards a partner, that it's a central purpose of it, and that when it's done properly, it's one of the strongest ways to hold a relationship together. And of course, they need to understand the meaning, like what's the point of sexuality? What is my goal in this area? What is the meaning of this behavior? How can I have a sanctified view about sexuality? So how do we do this? How do we raise children who can enjoy sexual harmony in their marriage? And so this is our goal. Our goal is not to have our children not be sexual and then on the day of their marriage suddenly they're sexual. It just doesn't work like that. Our goal is to raise children who have a harmonious perspective on sexuality. First things first, you don't have to be perfect about it. This is a process that we all struggle with. Sexuality, our feelings are strong and challenging. We all struggle. And so we can't stop doing this because we feel that somehow we're not, perfect in this area. It's never too early to talk to your children about sexuality, and it's never too late to improve as a parent. There are still some things I'm straightening out with some of my kids, and they're in their 30s now, about sexuality. Together we're sort of working out, and sometimes I still say, I don't know that I handled that very well when you're a kid. This is how I wish I had handled it, so that as they start working with their children, they can do a little bit better. And guilt is simply not helpful in the sense of, especially in this particular slide, it's not helpful as a parent to feel like, I've done so many things wrong in this area, I'm just feeling, put that aside. You can start fixing things pretty quickly, and you can improve things pretty quickly. It's not helpful. So 3 central recommendations: change how, when, and why you talk about sexuality. It's helpful for me to always think about these 3. So how am I talking about it? When and why? How? Improve your relationship. This is the most important in the sense of the power of what you talk about in terms of sexuality. When you have a strong relationship with your child, a good emotional connection with them, you can not quite get away with murder, but you can do a lot of things poorly, and it works out quite well. That's if you feel like you're disconnected from the child, you don't start by having conversations about sexuality. That's not the place to start. You start by getting your relationship just moving into a positive direction. So improve that relationship. Parents who have strong relationships with their children, they do make reasonable demands. Sometimes parents think that it means I'm just letting them do whatever they want to. That's not true. They set limits, they expect obedience, but they have maximum autonomy. They're encouraging the child to participate in those limits and encouraging the child to participate in handling when they break those limits, what should happen. They listen patiently to their child's point of view and try to do that in a non-judgmental way, even when you know the child's perspective is not quite straight, and it often isn't. But you're listening and you're respecting their point of view. And encourage participation in family decision-making. And most importantly is a lot of involvement. You're involved in your child's life. You're doing the things they like to do. You're going to the events they like to go to. I cannot tell you how many musicals I had to attend. I didn't like musicals. I like them now. They drilled down into me. One of my sons was obsessed with them. Went to musicals over and over with them. It really helped our relationship. So here's why this is so important. Okay, if on the overall patterns are, if you improve the frequency of parent-child discussions about sexuality, you reduce sexual anxiety, which is good, and you increase healthy sexuality. However, look what happens when we then divide the parents into those who have a poor relationship with their child, a moderate relationship, and a high-quality relationship. So this is what happens. In terms of the anxiety, the first group, it's now no longer significantly associated with decreasing anxiety. So the first group, in S, means it's not significant anymore. So the more a parent with a poor relationship with their child starts talking about sexuality, it has no effect on reducing sexual anxiety. The moderate ones, it does have an effect. It's half as strong as the ones that have a strong relationship. And then it's the same thing with healthy sexuality. So that relationship is that foundation that lets that message get delivered in an effective way to your child. Things to try. So encourage a culture of openness. Please avoid metaphors. No more food stuff, okay? It's always food. I don't know why we just can't talk about sexuality. Some kind of piece of gum that everybody chewed on that nobody else wants now, or whatever metaphor you want to come up with. The child knows you're using metaphors because you're uncomfortable talking about sexuality. And that's more important than whatever power you think this metaphor has. Just get rid of the metaphors in the sexuality area. It confuses them. They don't know what it actually means. And it lets them know, again, that you're not comfortable with this. So foster consistent, open communication. Try not to overreact to shame or shame your child or question. So when this starts working, they will start telling you things you sometimes don't want to know. And you'll go, what are you thinking? That's what's going on inside of you. What were you thinking when you did that? But you don't say that. What you say is, it's just wonderful you can talk to me about this. And inside, you're kind of torn up a little bit about it. But you're saying, thank you. Let's talk about now, what are we going to do? What do you want to do? What do you think? And instead of any kind of judgmental sort of statement, what you want to do is appreciate the hardest thing, which is that they've come to you and they've shared this very difficult thing. That's the most important thing you can do. So tell your child repeatedly that they can ask you anything and make it so. That's anything. Any of these difficult questions about sexuality. And you'll have to take a deep breath often. Okay, let's get in here. Let's talk about this stuff, and just do it. And you're not going to know the answers sometimes. Say, they'll start talking about some difficult thing. Right now, what's really popular is experimenting with fluid sexuality. They call it. It's bisexuality. In the high schools, it's very popular for kids to experiment with different relationships with different genders to see what their sexual orientation is. It's the in thing to do, even in Utah. And so, they're going to maybe ask you, how do you know if you're attracted to somebody of the same sex or the opposite sex? And you might feel like you're not very capable of talking about that conversation, but just get in it with them. Start talking about it. Ask them questions. Well, how do you think you know? What are your friends saying that lets you know? And then share some of your thoughts, and then do a little more reading, figure some things out, and keep in the conversation with them about these hard topics. That'll give them the opportunity to resolve that with you. So improve your relationship. A number of things you can do. Of course, find something to praise for your child every single day. Find time to spend together, just you and your child. Do something that your child wants to do, but you may not normally do. So I use the example of going to musicals. Whatever it happens to be, your child loves. We call this love leverage. You've got to increase that love leverage. Love leverage is everything, makes the things you talk about have more power. Because they know you love them and they love you. And so ask this one, and when you ask this question, they'll hopefully tell you. Ask them how you can improve your relationship with them. And they'll often tell you, especially in this area of sexuality, that you need to stop lecturing. You talk too much, Dad. You talk too much, Mom. Now, they're not going to say that to their dads because their dads don't talk about it at all. But if you do talk, parents tend to get into the lecturing mode because children get quiet very fast and the parents get nervous and then they start lecturing. So if they tell you to stop lecturing, listen to them. And I'll have another recommendation about that in a minute. Change when. One big talk, of course, is not enough. You have to be proactive. You have to talk about this a lot. Here's the two main styles of when and how. You don't want to be this kid here, okay? This kid isn't going to get hurt, but he's also not going to develop his muscles, and he's not going to be able to use his body the way it was meant to be used. And so most religious parents, that's what they want. Basically, take the sexuality out of my child, put it aside, and then when they're married, put it back in them. That's what they want. Can't have it. And so that's called cocooning. That's overprotecting, over-insulating, and not helping them be pre-armed. And so pre-arming is very different. That's where you make these active attempts to help them understand their sexuality and help them have thought through a variety of scenarios that they may encounter and how they might react to those scenarios. And as importantly, how they will talk to you and have you be part of the team as they go through those experiences. So let's go in. Proactive. Most parents wait until their children are sexually active to start talking to them about sexuality. Of course, that's a little late. That's called reactive parenting. However, this is the most difficult thing with religious parents. They are more likely to think that most other children are interested in sex and sexual activity, but their child is the exception. This is a consistent finding, and it's stark. So you ask religious parents, do you think your child is having struggles with sexuality? Do you think that they're having sexual feelings, et cetera, et cetera? They always rate them the lowest of any parents out there about sexual, like their child does not have these things going on. Then you ask their children, and their children are pretty much regular children. They're having struggles with this area, but their parents don't want to acknowledge that, and that's a problem. So pre-arming, what you want to do basically, when you do this well, what happens is they're much more likely to adopt your values rather than their peers. They're much more likely to delay first sexual intercourse, and if they are involved in sex, it's likely to be safer. And if they, once they're married or they're experiencing sex in a proper context, they have higher levels of healthy sexuality. So this is what we want to achieve. Some things to try. Ask questions, don't lecture. However, you're going to have children that are very different personality-wise. They essentially fall into two main categories, more introverted, more extroverted. The introvert, and you know this by about 6 months old in most children. The children that are overstimulated by a little too much stimulation, they shut down, they get crabby and whiny, and they want to go sleep. Those are your introverted. You can see this very early in childhood. And extroverted ones, they thrive on that stimulation, and they're very outgoing. And so if you have an outgoing child, they're probably going to talk to you a lot about sexuality, as they're going to talk to you about a lot of things. If you have an introverted child, it's never going to get really easy. Just accept that. They're just going to be very private. It's going to be hard for them to talk about it. You can't suddenly expect them to change their whole personality. So you just keep on going at it. You just keep on bringing up the topic. You just keep on talking about it. They get a little more comfortable. They get a little more open, but they're never going to be like the extroverted child. So your child, if you have an introverted child, you're going to be prone to go into lecture very quickly because you'll ask them a question. They'll give you 1 or 2 word answers. And as a parent, and you'll kind of sigh, and then you'll just start lecturing. Well, this is, and then go on, and then you'll notice your child's sort of tuned out. So with an introverted child, you just very short conversations, and then you have to have more frequency, but not length in conversation. So cut the lecturing out if you can. Have periodic family discussions about sexuality. Talk about modesty, puberty, relationships, reproduction, anatomy. Have them teach. This is very important. When you have them teach, you find out what they know and what they don't know. And of course, you have to guide them here. You can't go on the internet and find out about sexual anatomy. No. I mean, you're going to give them some materials, and you're going to say, teach us a lesson on reproduction. And then as they teach, they will come up with all kinds of very interesting things that are not really possible. And you'll figure out what they know and what they don't know, and it will just you'll have these fun conversations. But when you let them teach, really interesting things happen. Find a special time, at least several times a year, when you go out with your child individually and have an in-depth conversation. Now, most of the good conversations about sexuality will happen impromptu. You'll be in the car going somewhere, and they'll say, and they'll bring up something, and you'll have this great conversation. So I don't want to give you the impression that if you have these formal talks a couple times a year, those are going to be the times where it really works well. But you still should have those formal talks. Some time to just drill down and talk about what's going on in their life, what are they feeling sexually, what's happening, what's going on with their friends, what's going on with relationships. All of these areas, it's really important to sort of make sure you have this happen a couple times a year. Use correct body part names for body parts so they have a language to talk to you and they know exactly what you're talking about. Use pre-arming to help your children develop strategies to resist temptation. So this means go through a wide variety of scenarios. What are you going to do the first time you see that image of somebody without clothes on? What are you going to do the first time somebody asks you to do this or that? You go through the scenarios and have them tell you their strategies and come up with a process. So pre-arm them when they experience these things that are not going to be very enjoyable for them. Now this is very important. You want, again, the valence, emotional valence, the tone to be positive almost all the time when you talk about sexuality. So what this means is when you talk about pornography, when you talk about safe touch, which is, when people might want to, predators and stuff might want to take advantage, you need to have those conversations, how to stay safe. But you don't put them together in a conversation around healthy sexuality because they're so scary and they're so negative that they take over the tone of the conversation. Now, when you're having one of these regular conversations about healthy sexuality, it's not uncommon for one kid to bring up something like porn or something. You don't just shut that down and say, no, we're not talking about that right now. Turn it into a strange thing. Just mention it and then move the conversation back to the healthy sexuality and say, hey, we'll talk more about pornography, or we'll talk about protection, safe touch, that kind of thing at another day, and make sure you get to that. So it's helpful to think about moving those apart. Because generally what you want to do, and this is going to be very hard for most of you because the topic is difficult for you to talk about, is you want to have 5 positive conversations about the positive sides of sexuality, the wonder of reproduction, the beauty of healthy sexuality, how to have a harmonious sexual experiences, or harmonious sexual approach, etc. You want that 5 of those conversations for every negative conversation that you're having about pornography or problems that can occur, sexually transmitted infections, etc. So you have to think about that balance. Okay, I think we're getting close here. What time are we supposed to? A couple minutes? All right, real quickly. So some of these whys can be helpful. Really important to give them a lot of whys. So puberty, why do physical changes happen and how are they normal? So you can make puberty become a point of celebration if you do this right. Something that really is an important milestone, something that is really a beautiful thing. Or you can talk about menstruation and you can talk about menstrual bleeding and you can turn it into a really negative thing. So you need to couch it in a positive perspective, the beauty of reproduction. Modesty, what does it mean? Why is it important? Masturbation, why individual expressions of sexuality are not ideal, though the feelings are normal and the struggle is real. Dating, why we don't date and pair off early in adolescence, and how that interferes with their long-term goals about sexuality. Okay, let's finish up here. The last image I want to leave with you is this. Every physical capability we get in life, we get before we have enough brains to know how to use it. Every single one. So you know this. You see your child start to walk, and they're able to walk, and what do? They walk right into the corner of the table. They fall over the stairs. They walk out into the street. All of these ways, they hurt themselves, and it's very challenging those first few weeks of walking with a child to keep them from, you feel like the Child Protective Service is going to take this child away because they have so many bruises on their body. We don't have a problem with thinking about extending a hand like this and helping that child learn how to walk in a more stable way. But when it comes to sexuality, for some reason, we don't remember that they're going to learn how to be sexual. They're going to feel sexual feelings. They're going to be sexual beings way earlier than they have enough sense how to handle these. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. And we want to think about ourselves as reaching down a hand and helping them along the way, and they're still going to have a lot of bruises. And that's okay. That's the way it works. And as they get better and better at it, and we keep holding their hand, pretty soon they're going to be stable and they're going to figure this thing out. But there's going to be that time of adjustment. And so if we have that attitude and we see them as that beautiful little child, we can have the proper tone. And that's it. Thank you very much.